because of the slow news cycle, if you will, and the lack of news coming out of exoduses from FC Barcelona's first team. I think there's more attention paid on this Ilaix story than there usually would be. This is kind of your run-of-the-mill contract negotiation that's not going well, and that happens a lot. I mean, over the course of Messi's career, there have been junctures where those contract negotiations haven't been looking good, and then, of course, he always resigns. He always comes back to the club. And that happens with a lot of players at a lot of different levels. And so it becomes a bigger referendum, I think, more than Ilaix, about how Barca are handling young player contracts, particularly the highest paid earners like Ilaix Moriba. And what also brings us to the forefront is Cadet A, Ico Bravo, who I had mentioned on that show with Naveed. He was probably Barcelona's, we'll say, best forward who's under the age of 19 or 18, if you will, where he was kind of the best player at 16 years old at that level. And apparently he wanted to go from the Cadet A to the Juvenil A. So instead, to be with U19s, he left for Bayer Leverkusen. They just offered him a straight shot to the U19s. He didn't have to do the U18s at all. And potentially that means that he might also have in his contract things about reaching the first team a little quicker. And for his career, I'm glad he went there instead of a Chelsea, like we saw other players have gone, or Man City, where I think if you're a young player, if you go to Man City or Chelsea over Barca, I mean, you're just, it's the same problem. But for him to go and choose Bayer Leverkusen, their U19s, he gives himself a much better opportunity to reach a first team a lot quicker than Barcelona. Totally understand that. Again, don't fault the player for looking to try to get what they want as quick as they can. And then financially, my problem with the Ilaix is their agent is this German agency, Rogan. You heard this story, Levon? Yeah. So friend of the pod, Alex Tweeka, was on top of this story. So agents are different with every client, but one of the only other quote unquote big players that Rogan represents is Max Meyer, who a few years ago played for Schalke. That's where he got his notoriety. That's where he made his first Germany appearance with Schalke a few years ago, but he asked for a huge contract. Instead, Schalke goes, "That's crazy. You're Max Meyer. You're not Tony Kroos." And then he winds up at Crystal Palace on a free transfer a few years later, going from a German international to a player now last year who can barely find a spot at Köln, who was in a relegation fight in the Bundesliga, where he played 10 matches last season in the spring after basically being forced out of Palace. And so Rogan has a terrible reputation as being an agency that negotiates out the wazoo too many talks, too much hardlining, too much, arguing with these clubs, and the clubs kind of shut down. And so for Ilaix Moriba to choose the agent is puzzling from the beginning. His old agent was his dad, but it is puzzling. So he's not traveling to Germany with the first team. He had 18 appearances with the first team last year with 1 goal and 3 assists that he's trying to argue his credibility for. And it was reported by Diario that the player asked for a 3 million net salary per season, which is triple what he earns right now and more than players like Pedri and Araujo. The latest news is that Roman Planas and Matteo Alemany on Wednesday met with his agents. A 4th meeting is set, but they are still not close at all, if reports to be believed. His deal expires in June 2022. So I saw you mentioning that it's a weird spot for everybody to be in. Do you sell the player now can you really freeze out an 18-year-old player? And you can physically, you can freeze him out. That makes sense. But would he allow himself to be frozen out? I mean, that wouldn't make any sense at all, to be frozen out for a year if you're an 18-year-old player. I think that's where the club then has leverage.
Yeah, and we should use that leverage. First of all, like, everybody is quick to blame the agencies, and I do believe that one of the big advantage of sulfuric acid is you can put it in a barrel and hopefully dump those agents in that barrel. But having said that, the customer is king.
True.
So agencies don't own their players. The players are their clients. So the agents do whatever the player wants. It's not the other way around. Players don't do what the agents want. The agents do what the players want. So the root here is not that that this agency is greedy, even though they are. The root here is that Ilaix prioritizes money over most other things, probably, because I do believe that I think we have discussed this before when we discussed both Ilaix and Alejandro Balde 2 weeks ago. A more perfect setup in an elite team for Ilaix Moriba does not exist. Right. Like, his profile is exactly what Koeman wants in the team and what we do not have. Here he can be a local hero and as such be forgiven for mistakes a bit more so than new signings at the club. Because every fan, if a youth player of that club plays hard for their club, every fan is more patient with that than a signing. So it is very sad to see what he is doing. Obviously it's not in the interest of the club. I don't see how it is in his own interest. And Barcelona should use the leverage absolutely, and simply tell him, look, you think you are worth 3 million euros a year? Great. Go get them somewhere else.
Yeah,
and bring us 30 million.
Yeah, and the only place
whoever wants to sign you.
I don't know if legally I'm allowed to say this, but hey, it's my podcast. But a few years ago, again, I won't to say a name, but a few years ago when I was going for, we'll say, a bit more of the on-air broadcasting jobs, I have the job that I have now. People who follow me on the internet know that I do my work. I get my work in. But a lot of those jobs I've gotten on my own over the years through knowing people and just kind of working hard and reaching out, cold calling. But when a few years ago, I did actually use an agency to try to help me get on-air positions, not even union jobs, but so again, legally, it wasn't a union. I don't say anything like that. So I worked in an agency to try to get me some positions. And what they would do for me, or what they would tell me on that side is, now obviously Ilaix Moriba knows the situation a little better than I did, because I didn't know the other companies that they were trying to put on my doorstep. But it took me about 6 months. They did throw some stuff at me that made a little bit of sense. And I worked 2 jobs that it was fine. They weren't great jobs, but they were jobs the agency found me. But they would then try to overpromise for what I was paying them to look for these positions for me. And they would round up overpromising. And I think my concern is this agency, again, not to say that they're evil, they're doing for their client what they believe that they can do. So I don't think it's about a moral argument. It's that their job is to get as much money for their client. And they have the confidence in themselves as an agency to say, we believe that we can get you triple your salary, because look at your last negotiations when you were 16 years old. Barca wanted you desperately, and they didn't let you go to Man City. So they gave you your first team debut now at 18. You've always been Ansu Fati level as far as what the club considers you as a prospect. Look at, what is it? Was it The Guardian, or was it, I think it was goal.com. He was considered a top 10 prospect under the age of 19 or 20 or whatever it was. So yeah, he's clearly wanted by other clubs around the world. And I think the agency, I would not be surprised if he winds up signing anyway for that 3 million or 3-year contract that Barcelona has set out. I think that this could be over next week, and he's now a Barca player, and we all then have to kind of forget this happened, because that's what happens. It's all money. It has nothing to do with us, the fans. So that's what I would just tell people, that I went off on my thing about the racist stuff. Again, that's completely absurd. But even you and I, where it's like, I try my best and hedge my bets, because I'm not going to disparage a player and their motives in negotiations when A, there's nothing in the news cycle, and B, if he does wind up staying at the club, it just business as normal. It has nothing to do with me. It's a bunch of rich people arguing with other rich people. Well, I'm just hosting a podcast thousands of miles away. So what do I care? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, I care because I host this, but if it's decided and he stays at the club, and, we'll say goodbye if we have to, but until then, I mean, I assume he's going to be a Barcelona player, and they're just negotiating. And if for anything, it's a lesson for me that in my personal life, I need to fight harder for the things I need to fight for. I need to fight for myself a little harder on different jobs and stuff.
Sure, possible. But I mean, you're right that the agency has the right to try to get him as much money as possible. At the same time, he can tell the agency, hey, did you know that I already have €1 million on my bank account?